But I don't think that's fooling anybody.
If I make a decision to use armed forces, it will be legitimate, totally corresponding to general norms of international law because there was an appeal by the legitimate president. Our partners, especially in the United States, always clearly and precisely formulate their geopolitical and state interests for themselves. They have supported an anti-constitutional coup.
Vladimir Putin today talking about the action in Ukraine. He says he didn't send forces there, but he reserves the right to use force there. This is Secretary of State John Kerry traveled to Kiev and talked about that as well. President Obama interrupting a local event at a local school here in Washington, D.C., talking to reporters, setting up a stand there in a classroom and answering a question at length about the situation in Ukraine, saying it's being mischaracterized.
The way that some of this has been reported, that the suggestion somehow that the Russian actions have been clever strategically. I actually think that this has not been a sign of strength, but rather is a reflection that countries near Russia have deep concerns and suspicions about this kind of meddling, and if anything, it will push many countries further away from Russia.
With that, let's bring in our panel tonight. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles.
So the president is saying that what Putin has managed to do is not strategically clever. Well, let's review. Putin has taken over the Crimean Peninsula, which the Russians had held for more than 2 centuries, lost 20 years ago. He's recovered it. It's strategically extremely important. It's the warm water port. It's the thing that the Russians have dreamt about for 300 years since Peter the Great, lost in the 90s. He regains it without a shot fired in anger, without any consequences yet. I don't think there are going to be any that are really going to hurt him. The Europeans are resisting any real sanctions. He now is in a position to take other parts of Ukraine if he wants. He's destabilized a regime in Ukraine that is intensely anti-Russian. He's sitting in a seat where everybody has to come to him, holding a lot of cards, and it's not clever when Obama says, and Kerry also did in Kiev, that this is a sign of weakness and not strength. You've got to wonder what the cosmos our president, Secretary of State, are living in.
A.B.
Well, there seems to be this debate. Obama's critics think that this was, the people who are criticizing Obama, I should say, seem to think that, this was Putin's master plan all along and that it's been in the works since Georgia. It always had his sights on Crimea. President Obama clearly is trying to say this was a sort of a reactive moment for him. It's a sign of weakness. He's backed himself into a corner. But I think both sides agree that the administration has to do something now. The problem is that I think no matter what President Obama has done to get himself in this corner, and he is in one, and he was in one on Syria, and Vladimir Putin provided him an exit ramp back in September that isn't working out very well. No matter what he has done, the world has changed, and our European partners are not interested in extricating themselves from financial and economic relations with Russia. 75% of Germany's oil and gas from Russia. You know where all the Russian oligarchs' corrupt money is hidden all over Europe. They're not interested in extricating themselves from that relationship. So no matter who is president today, they would come up against that. So we'll be watching in the days to come as he tries to provide loan guarantees to Ukraine and push for expedited acceptance into NATO of Georgia, et cetera. But really, until those partners are coming to the table and willing to help, there's not much we can do.
Yeah, because that Russian money, let's remember, you can talk about freezing all of those assets around the world, but it is also money that is flowing into all of those economies, and there may be some pushback along those lines. Take a listen to Secretary Kerry. Just hours before he lands in Kiev, Vladimir Putin in Moscow holds that press conference with reporters. So as Kerry is on the ground, he is actually being informed what Putin has said just hours before.
He denied that there were any Russian troops in Crimea, occupying Crimea. He blamed the crisis on United States interference, saying that the U.S.
Really denied there were troops in Crimea?
Yes, he did.
It is not appropriate to invade a country and at the end of a barrel of a gun dictate what you are trying to achieve. That is not 21st century G8 major nation behavior.
Steve.
Well, he certainly should have been better briefed. The problem, I think, is that this is what the Obama administration was supposed to have been good at. This is what he sold himself as a candidate in 2008 and in 2012, somebody who knew how to manipulate soft power. The problem that I think he faces, that the United States faces, is that you can't use soft power if there's virtually no threat of hard power. And we've seen repeatedly, and the Russians have seen up close, whether you're talking about the negotiations about Syria, whether you're talking about Iran, whether you're talking about bilateral relations, the Russians have seen repeatedly a lack of resolve from the president that would suggest that he's willing to do anything, to tolerate any kind of a confrontation, military or otherwise. The Russians were at the table when the president first threatened to use force in Syria and then backed off. The Russians were able to persuade him that that was the proper course. Having seen this up close so many times, I think the president's options are few, in part because he can't make those threats anymore. But he should be able to go to the Europeans in theory and say, look, this is something that we have to do together. Even if there's a short-term cost, there's a long-term necessity to demonstrate that you can't simply invade a sovereign nation and take over parts of it. And you need to also send a message that he can't go any further.
We're just getting from Ed Henry, quoting senior administration officials, that the president spoke today with German Chancellor Angela Merkel for about an hour by phone. They are working on what they are describing as an off-ramp for Vladimir Putin, a diplomatic off-ramp, so the Russian president can de-escalate, in their words. Hopeful signs, according to the administration. They are saying that they see that Putin possibly could take a pause here, and they are trying to structure something to allow him to do that. Still no timetable, according to the senior administration official, on economic sanctions, and absolutely no timetable on any military action or even talking about it. Charles.
This is astonishing. On the one hand, they're unable, our people, our leaders, to muster anything that the Europeans will join that will hurt Putin. And on the other hand, you're telling us that they are thinking that Putin thinks he made a mistake, did make a mistake, and is looking for an off-ramp. And our real job is not to slap on sanctions and to push him out of Crimea, but to allow him some kind of diplomatic exit that will save the face. It's in tandem with what he said about it being a sign of weakness on the part of the Russians. I mean,
but are they interpreting his news conference as some kind of blink, as something that's saying, I didn't send forces, and he's sending the signal that he's stepping back?
That's not a blink. That's a KGB agent lying through his teeth, which is what they trained to do for all of their lives. I mean, when Hitler went into the Sudetenland, he claimed it was in response to a desire on the part of the population. This is what all dictators do. The idea that somehow it's a blink because he's waiting to see whether he wants to take the rest of Ukraine, and that's a sign of weakness, I think is delusional.
Next up, Ukraine and Hillary